Alright, for the recording, this is round 5. This is one of the semi-finals for Fight Night number 4. We have Ian in the top seat here versus Richard Pinkie Pie in the bottom seat here, battling it out for the grand final slot. Good luck, guys. This is going to be a very interesting match. So this is Jund Delirium at 8 points, no less, versus actual factual Storm. So if Ian can put on enough pressure, discard spells, creatures to pressure Richard's life total, that's his game plan for game 1. Pinkie Pie, Richard in the bottom slot, he does not need to worry about stack interaction other than exactly one mental misstep, which means he is heavily incentivized to just go for it. There are some things that can stop him that are permanent based, as well as a lightning bolt that, can affect how his Citadel turn goes, for example. But there isn't stack interaction in game 1. So if Ian has any of the permanent based hate that he can have in game 1, like a Void Walker, for example, Bowmasters to, tag at extra card draw, tag at the graveyard, then that'll be his way to try to stem the bleeding, back that up with some discard spells and some pressure, and that's kind of what he has to do. But yeah, on Richard's side, he's just going to go for it if he has the ability to, and it's going to be a pretty traditional race here. Gonna take a Surveil. Very notable that he didn't get Undercity Sewers. We're firing off an EI. Okay. That explains the Thundering Falls, at the very least. He could also have this Sewers in hand. It's entirely possible. But if he does, that's noteworthy, for sure. Richard has updated the Storm deck. It now has a Rite of Flame, which it definitely did not last time. Who updates a Storm deck? That's crazy. I was playing JP's Storm deck back in the day when I played a lot of Highlander in Sydney, and I didn't update that deck for years. You just put things on the stack and kill them. He's still innovating. He found space for a Rite of Flame. And notably, I mean, he cut the Sphinx of the Steel Wind. That's a pretty crazy thing. He might be kicking himself on that. There are a lot of Jund decks today. Alright, so bit of a slow turn there. So Richard spent the turn EIing, played a Bauble, and played a Surveil land. So developing his mana, presumably either restructuring his hand, trying to get pieces together, or just needs more lands in play. Ian has grown his Netherglyph to a 3/4. And now this is really important, because if his Netherglyph was a 2/3, then he would have put Richard to 13, and he would have had like a 7-turn clock. But he's followed up with a Baraglyph, so now he has a 2-turn clock. If Richard can't win the game by his turn 5, or interact with the board, he's dead. And the more damage you put on against this Storm deck, the more likely it is the Citadel can't get there. So it's very, very important to apply as much pressure as possible. In saying that, a Rain of Filth has been put on the stack. Rain of Filth, for anyone who doesn't know, lets you sacrifice your lands for black mana. It's kind of like a High Tide, but different. Which means if you put it on the stack, you're going to try and win the game. Which I presume means that Ian is dead. I think it is incredibly likely that he is dead. Tinker is going to get Citadel. We have our land drop for Citadel. We have a Sphere as a redraw. We have some mana and pull. We have some black mana available. I'm pretty sure this is gonna get there. I think it's incredibly unlikely to brick from this point. You have Sphere and Star as rerolls. You have your land drop. If it's a fetch, you have another reroll. Black Lotus, let's go. I mean, that's the thing. Like, Richard plays this deck in paper, and that's gas. But anyone else can play this deck in the Fight Night series, because Black Lotus is like 7 ticks. Burning Wish? What are we getting? Are we getting, like, Mind's Desire? Oh no, we're getting the thing, right? Elemental Eruption? Oh no, we're just getting a discard spell. Okay. We're taking the Mon Collapse. Are we just casting the Burning Wish and the Dread Fugue for Storm count? I think we are. Mystical Tutor? Yeah. Alright. GG's. And that's game 1. Ian Thought Seized, played a threat, played another threat, attacked for some damage. Richard spent some turns drawing cards and playing land drops, and then the game was over. That is pretty much game 1 of Storm versus a mid-range deck that does not have interaction. It's a pretty clear-cut case. Why would I want to play? The learning curve is masochistic? You're missing out. Learning how to play Storm optimally is one of the best things you can do. Alright, so we're going into the sideboard games, and this is where Ian actually picks up percentage points and isn't just dead in the water. So he's got a Duress as an extra discard spell. He's got some Pyroblasts, which can hit Tinker. He has a couple of Graveyard Hate pieces available. I'm not certain how many he's going to bring in. He has Ashiok and Opposition Agent, which stop things like Mystical Tutor and Tinker. He has Force of Vigor, which is a way to tag things like Chromox and Helm of Awakening. He has Collector Oof, which hits LED and Lotus. He has Carpet of Flowers to accelerate into these effects. He has Brotherhood's End. He has Veil of Summer if he really wants to protect himself against Richard's discard spells. Ian can sideboard anywhere between like 4 and 11 cards. He is entirely able to change to be incredibly hateful for game 2 and 3. However, there is an underlying factor here which cannot be understated. Ian does not have access to 0 mana interaction. All of his interaction has some kind of requirement. So discard spells have to be able to nab the only thing. Permanents that interrupt the combos have to be able to stick. And they usually have to sit and play. So in game 3, if Ian wins game 2 by sideboarding in 11 cards and drawing a bunch of sideboard cards, that's great. But he'll go to game 3, and the only thing he will have access to in game 3 on the draw is Leyline of the Void if he wants it, and Mental Misstep. Which means he could just die on turn 1, and there's going to be absolutely nothing he can do about it. And I think that is where Richard Pinkie Pie has gained so many equity points over the course of the Fight Night series, is that so many of his opponents simply can't win game 3 because they're just dead before they can do anything. And I think that's something that is going to persist going forward. A lot of the other combo decks in the format have powerful turn 1s, but they don't end the game immediately. So if you put an Atraxa in play or a Vagavoth in play, that may get you there, It may not. If you put 10 copies of Tendrils of Agony on the stack on turn 1, that's it. GG's, shake my hand. You know? So let's see what happens. Game 2, Ian is going to have the play. Both players keep 7. We're going to count the sideboard cards over the course of this. I think it would be incredibly surprising if Ian goes 2 turns without playing a sideboard card, or one of his main interactive mainboard cards. So keeping a hand with an Inquisition is a great start. We see Thundering Falls, Urza's Bauble, Yorgwill, Pact of Negation, Mishra's Bauble, Rain of Filth, and Preordain, and we take Yorgwill. Okay. Taking Yorgwill suggests that Ian doesn't have graveyard interaction in his hand. Or at the very least, it's minor. Pinky gonna fire off some baubles here. This would have been a sweet game to see a value Yorgwill that didn't win the game on its own, where you just cast like a bunch of baubles and a Preordain and a land. That would have been great. Kind of sad. Fired off the Urza's Bauble, but not the Mishra's Bauble. Okay. So we're looking to see a card from the opening hand. But the Mishra's Bauble draw, we want to draw at a later point to protect the card from a discard spell. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Bauble fires off in upkeep here. It doesn't. Okay. Might save it to find a shuffle or something. This is a big turn. So Ian led with a discard spell on turn 1. That is critical. But this is a big turn. He needs to play something that matters this turn. Now, it doesn't have to be a hate piece. It can be something as simple as a Tarmogoyf that threatens to end the game. But it does have to matter. Voidwalker? Okay. Voidwalker is a good one. It puts on a lot of pressure. It interacts with the graveyard. Notably, he did take the Yorgwill, which would have been blanked by the Voidwalker. But it's possible that he just needs as many pieces as he can get. And just tagging as many bits and pieces of Richard's hand is how he wants to get there. So the Preordain gets fired off here, which suggests that the Bauble saw something that was bad, or we're just looking for card velocity. So losing chunks of his graveyard and the Yorgwill is going to matter, but it's entirely possible that you can just die from hand. Like, you just get Tinker Citadel and Tendrils off the top, and at no point do you use your graveyard. It's entirely possible. So Ian needs follow-up here. He needs to do something big this turn as well. He's going to attack for 3, which is good. Get him to 17. If you play a hate piece, a discard spell, or a really, really good threat, that's probably what's required here. Impending and Overlord. Okay. It's a little weak, but I guess if your plan is to disrupt very, very heavily, then you might have time to get to it. Notably, Overlord missed. It hit 3 fetch lands and a mental misstep, which is one of the few bits of interaction. That might have been close to worst possibles for that Overlord mill. That might have been worst possibles. It was real close. Or I guess technically milling a bunch of non-creatures that matter would have been worse. So like Carpet. Rebs and stuff. Hey, Ironblood. This format is called Australian 7-Point Highlander. So it's an eternal format, so we have vintage forwards, but instead of having a banned and restricted list, we have a point buy system. So the most powerful cards in Magic are legal, but you have 7 points to purchase the most powerful cards with. So for example, Ancestral Recall and Time Walk are 5 points. So you cannot put both of them in your deck. And that way it avoids becoming just vintage. Thanks, Spiderbite. But welcome! This is one of the coolest formats to play and watch, in my opinion. And I've played every single format very regularly. The fact that you see cards from Duskmourn, like Overlord of the Baelmerk, next to or opposite cards like Yawgmoth's Will, which is one of the most powerful cards ever printed, is just great. It's just really cool. So Richard hasn't done anything. He's kind of just getting cracked in for 3 here. I assume he needs to keep developing his mana. Not being able to work out of the graveyard and losing the Yawgwill is a pretty big deal. It's also possible that his hand is just not sculpted the way it needs to. And he needs more action. It is notable that by surveilling Sink into Stupor, Voidwalker now represents interaction. In order for Ian to have access to Sink into Stupor on a combo turn, he needs to stop attacking. And so this is going to be a critical decision point. If Ian decides to continue attacking to attempt to end the game, he may not have enough interaction to avoid dying. If he holds up Sink into Stupor, he may die because he's given Richard too much time to sculpt and develop his hand. Very curious to see what happens here. Emperor of Bones, okay. Does represent a bit of graveyard interaction. It can be grown to be a 4/4. Emperor of Bones represents a threat, so he may not attack with Voidwalker. He's getting in there. We're going to try and end the game. I respect that. We're definitely in the cross your fingers and hope territory. Let's see what happens. There is quite an important interaction at play here as well. Veil of Summer checks Tendrils of Agony. It also allows you to stop discard spell plus Tendrils. And so it will not stop discard spell next turn kill you, but it is one of the bigger points of interaction. If your deck contains no points on the reserve list, yeah, that's the accessibility rule. So up here on the top half, Ian is playing 8 points worth of cards, and that's why he has an Overgrown Tomb in play instead of a Bayou. So he's opted to take a bit more damage over the course of his day in order to cast his spells on time, but he gets to play 1 more point worth of powerful cards across Magic. It's one of my favorite parts about the format. It's a really cool format. I mean, if you want to read up on it, feel free to. If you check out my YouTube channel, which should be linked down below, I post a lot of educational content about Highlander. And this Fight Night series runs relatively close to weekly, and it's purely on Magic Online. So if you're not from Australia, you can join in. There's Friday night events, which usually equate to about Friday mornings for some people. And I know a lot of interstate or international players who have been dropping in to play some Highlander. The Saturday morning events are better for the Americans because it's Friday night. But G Crouch also plays our events, and he's based in Amsterdam because it means Friday morning for him on the Friday night events. Because I really do value having more people play this format. It's very important to me that out of all of the nonsense formats that Wizards manages, that the format that we manage as a community gets some love. Because I like to think that this format is better and more carefully curated than things like Modern. Back to the match, it is turn 4, and Pinky has put a Rider Flame on the stack. I assume that means he's going to do something impactful, but it may not be the full Monty. He might be under enough pressure that he feels like he has to do something important this turn. Because this is representing a lot of damage. It's also possible he's going to go for it and he has found enough pieces to actually do something. So this is going to be a big turn regardless. The fact that he's put a Rider Flame on the stack suggests that he's doing something. Rain of Filth. Okay, we're going all in. We're going completely all in. I love it. Let's see what happens. And like here, you can see some MH cards and a Dustmourn card and an Overgrown Tomb are against a deck that is very clearly attempting to cast a lot of spells and win the game. Dark Petition will not make mana. This is just tutoring. Okay. What does he get here? He's played a land this turn. He has 4 mana. Tendrils doesn't do it. He doesn't have access to a graveyard. Unless he has an artifact, I don't think he can put a Citadel into play. Petal. 5 mana? Tinker the Petal? So, did he Dark Petition for Petal so he could sack it to a Citadel? To just hope? I mean, this is about as all in as you can get. Alright, if the top card's a land, it's over. Grim Monolith? Okay. Here we go. If it's a land on a monolith, it's over. Force of Vigor, targeting Citadel and Overlord. That is some interaction. Good enough. Force of Vigor gets there. I did miss the Force of Vigor, so Ian has slightly more 0 mana interaction. Yeah, the Overlord kill, Ian's paying attention. I mean, he did have plenty of time to think about it, because he had the Force of Vigor in hand. But that's it. Ian gets there, and we're going to Game 3. Now, critically, I did mention this earlier. For Game 3, Pinkie Pie is on the play, which means Ian could simply keep a hand that has a turn 1 discard spell and a turn 2 threat and be dead. We might see what happens. Snapcast at a 0, post-event feedback on the points list and format. It sets up lethal for the next turn, very cool. Yeah, I think blowing up the Overlord there I mean, Ian has historically been someone who is very, very good at Magic the Gathering. And it's not format specific. That kid's just kind of good. Now, in this scenario, his back is against the wall, and he doesn't have quite as many options as I'm sure he would like, but I think he's still going to play correctly. So Pinky gets the play. Now, he has two options. He can mulligan aggressively to try to win the game as quickly as possible, or he can not mulligan and hope that he gets to keep a functional hand with many cards to grind out Ian's interaction. Pinky's mulled to 6, and Ian has kept 7. He might mull to 5. It is noteworthy that I believe Pinky can mull to 3 and win the game. It is still possible to win the game on turn 1. It would just be Lotus, Petal, Tinker. Probe sees Delta, Broadside, Fable, Arid Mesa, Pyroblast, Pyrogoyf, Ignoble Hierarch. So Ian has access to Pyroblast on turn 1, or a Mana Dork, and if he plays the Mana Dork, he has access to Fable turn 2. It's probably a little loose, but I respect keeping the hand because of the Pyroblast. And Richard is going to spend the turn setting up. Probe, Bauble, Ponder. Are you planning on doing any commentary about the Tab Games tournament? I was not present, and I wasn't there to film commentary. I probably won't do anything about that. Just because it was like a relatively small tournament, and there's not too much to say. I can't really cover every event, is the issue. Notably, next week at POG's events, I will be live streaming them and doing commentary for both the teams event and the singles event. And so that's what I'm focusing my energy on, is planning those events. But I don't typically do commentary after the fact unless things are filmed. Back to the game. Ian went for the turn 1 Hierarch to play a Fable, and Richard had responded with a Repeal. Kind of cycling that and buying a turn. I think it's interesting that he isn't saving Repeal for a hate piece. I think he's just aware that Ian's hand of Hierarch plus semi-expensive spells and a Pyroblast is a little bit soft to getting time walked. And honestly, the easiest way to generate mana for your combo turn is to make your land drops. That is like a critical component and a critical skill of combo decks and combo players, is being aware that you can buy more time to make your combo turn better if you just hit your land drops. Heaps of Mardu and red-white still when contrasted to the the VFN meta is wild. People will play whatever they want. It's great. The lands deck in top 8 was a surprise. I mean, there's a theory in Modern called the Tron guy. And the Tron guy is basically, if enough people throw Tron at a tournament, by pure mathematics and RNG, one of them will top 8. It is completely irrelevant who is playing the deck. It is completely irrelevant what the metagame is like. It's simply just throwing enough darts at the dartboard. Now, your goal is to be the Tron guy on the day. However, you are one of many. So any player can be the Tron guy of that day and get there, and it's not up to you. That's how I feel about lands, and to an extent how I feel about like Mardu in Highlander, is there's usually enough copies and people will do the thing. Yeah, it was also Will, who does play a lot of lands. But like, I don't think that matters. So we know Ian has a Pyroblast. Richard also knows he has a Pyroblast. he still has access to 7 mana. And if he just keeps casting black spells, Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune is a red spell that does not get Pyroblasted. It also gets rid of the Pyroblast. He's just going for it. He's giving access to Ian to 7 fresh cards because his hand doesn't function and he needs to just get there. This is a baller play. Lands has also been supported by recent depointings to an extent. I mean, I've depointed some of those cards not just for lands. I wanted people to play fair strip mine again. Alright, well the Pyroblast is gone. It could have been replaced with a Red Blast. It's possible. Notably, Pinky had a Burning Wish when he cast the Wheel of Fortune. So he had 3 mana, 4 mana. He could have cast a Burning Wish with 5 mana in pool. I don't know what he could have gotten. Are we just saying go? Okay. We somehow didn't get there. We didn't get anywhere. He had access to 3 black mana and 1 rainbow mana and 7 cards. And couldn't kill. Okay. Well, Ian now has access to up to 4 mana. And we have no idea what he can do. He could play like 3 discard spells this turn. I don't hate Wheeler's Painful Truce there. I mean, he could have just like... He could have Burning Wished for goblins, right? Like, he could have just made 14 goblins or something. That probably would have been good enough. I don't know how often it wouldn't be good enough. Well, we're getting Thoughtseize, so we get to see what he bricked with. Misty, Verdant, Flooded Strand, EI, Mystical Tutor, Reckless Impulse, Brainstorm. Yeah, that doesn't get there. That's crazy. Okay. Feels bad about not using Rain of Filth mana. I mean, the Rain of Filth would have just gone to the graveyard for Wheel of Fortune. So, like... It's interesting. It's interesting the combination of cards Richard had to draw where he couldn't win the game. With access to 3 black mana and a Lotus Petal, and the Storm was already at 5 or something, it seems incredibly likely that he would have won the game. Like, he also had 2 artifacts, so if he hit Tinker, he could have sacked the Petal, sack the other 2 lands, then sack the Vault to the Tinker to get Citadel. But he wouldn't have had a land drop, so he could have just bricked and died. At which point he has literally no permanence if Ian just untaps, uses one of the 7 fresh cards and the card off the top to blow up the Citadel. So with Richard's hand makeup, he kind of just had to do that. I don't know, I'm of the opinion that we could have just Burning Wished for Empty the Warrens and made like 14 guys. I feel like I would have got there. I guess it's possible he bought it in empty. Ashiok, Dream Render, Afterthought Seas. That's a good one. So Ashiok turns off Mystical Tutor here. It also turns off the 3 fetch lands, which are the only lands Richard hit off Wheel of Fortune. And it eats this graveyard for Yorgwill. Now, this graveyard is actually very irrelevant. It's pretty anemic here. You lose, like, the Probe, the Rain of Filth, and the Rite of Flame, I guess. Notably, Richard throwing the Petal and the Brainstorm into the Ashiok mill. But the Ashiok mill was targeting Ian. So I think Richard might have been trying to get rid of cards out of his hand with Ashiok and just missed that it was targeting Ian. Really could have used that pedal. I think this is going to be good enough. I mean, I am surprised that Ian didn't target Richard just to try and tag win cons. But I guess his hand and graveyard might kind of suck. Possible. So there was a Brainstorm. So there's a couple of fresh draws, but a lot of the cards seen with Thoughtseize really, really bad into Ashiok. We have 3 fetches and a Mystical Tutor. The EI got taken, the Brainstorm got cast, so there's like a Reckless Impulse left, and that's it. It's the only card that has text. It's not great. That being said, Ian doesn't really have pressure. He has a hate piece, and he has mana, and he has a bunch of cards in hand, but he does have to put something on the board that has more than 0 power. That's a good one. 1 mana, 6/7. Voidwalker. Relevant-ish. Arbor Elf. Yeah, sure. There's 2 cards in hand now. Do you mill or do you not? Wants to keep the Ashiok healthy. I think that's reasonable. Probably fine to just let it ride. End of turn Manamorphose. Into a bounce spell? Okay. This does unlock the Misty and another fetch land. We're still under a Voidwalker, but this is now significantly more doable. Because now we can cast MT, which means we can cast Tinker, and we have a land drop for Citadel. There's a misstep! Ian had 2 cards in hand and one of them was misstep. Oh, that's not good. I guess we're gonna spin some wheels. Reckless Impulse to start, I'm guessing. Oh. We don't have a graveyard. I think he has to get so lucky to get out of this. Kabara gets us to 3. And then we're casting Reckless Impulse. So that we have blue mana, sure. This has to hit Tinker, I'm pretty sure. Helm of Awakening Sewers. I don't think that can do anything. Sewers Surveil. Puts it on top. Cast the Helm. I mean, I guess you can say go. You're not dead on board. And then, I mean, there's enough gas in the deck. You know, Richard's deck has a Lotus and an LED to make mana. He's got a bunch of tutors. He still has both halves of Tinker and Citadel. He knows the misstep is gone. Ian's probably going to mill him for 4. And if he holds up Voidwalker, he can hold up Sink into Stupor. But there's a Helm now. I wonder if he keeps... Yeah, I think because he has the Netherglyph, I think you hold up Voidwalker here. Holding up Stupor seems reasonable. It's also possible that you upkeep Voidwalker, cast Mystical Tutor, and get, like, Force of Vigor or a Thoughtseize. That would be a super heads-up play. We'll see what happens. Bunch of options. I mean, Richard has 3 cards in hand, but if he untaps, he's going to have 4 cards in hand, a Helm online, and 5 lands in play. He's going to be on like 10, which is pretty bad, but it's also entirely doable with that. You just have to put the Tendrils in your hand to cast with your extra mana, so you don't have to pay 4 life for it. But it's doable. Notably, Ashok costs 2 mana this turn because of Helm. So he has access to an incredible amount of mana. Whether or not... I mean, he doesn't have the Pyroglyph, so he can't, like, Arena a Pyroglyph and just end the game. I don't know how often he can have lethal here. It's not never, but it's pretty hard. Because even if he reanimates Pyroglyph, we know it's as big as Netherglyph because Richard doesn't have a graveyard. And enchantments and artifacts are covered, so he'd have to find a way to get the Ashok into his own graveyard or mill another Planeswalker for Pyroglyph to be 7. But then he would have 10 on board plus Pyroglyph trigger for 7. So it's not unreasonable. He would need to mill a Planeswalker and have a reanimation spell in hand. He's going to mill Pinky, who loses the Lotus and Beseech, which is a good tutor. He loses Yorgwill, which doesn't matter for Richard's side. I don't know if you're Yorgwilling with your Voidwalker. It lets you cast Pyroglyph? Does that matter? I don't think so. Depending on what 2 cards are in Richard's hand, I think there's a non-zero chance he has lethal. Beseech was pretty close to lethal. Animate Dead Bowmasters. Ping you. Puts to 6. Land. Bash for 7. Put you to 9. Say go. We're just going to hold up Stupor and say go. I think that's reasonable. I think holding up Stupor is reasonable here. There's probably some weird lethal, but... Hardcast Citadel. I can't imagine that's resolving. I mean, he has another turn, right? He goes to 1 from combat. Or 2. No, he can go to 1. That is notably not lethal. Because Animate Dead shrinks the Bowmasters. So Arbor Elf plus Orc Army plus Nethergoyf is 8. And then you can just cast the Citadel again next turn, but you're on 1. It's probably technically possible, but I can't imagine it's likely. If Bloodstained Mire can get Watery Grave to bounce Nethergoyf, that puts us to 4 for the Citadel. Ian milled himself and hits a walker. He has 9 power. Is that it? GG's! Ian gets there. That played out pretty much exactly as I thought it would. That was a wild game. It felt like Comrack had just enough at every point in time where he could have very easily not had enough at like every point in time. GG's. Ian advances to the finals, and Pinkie Pie comes in a very respectable 3rd, 4th finish.